You have famously said that it was a book that led you to becoming...
May I add one more thing to that question? I must say that I never thought of my books as autobiographical. For the longest time I would resist that. Cutting for Stone, I would say, how can you ask me if it's autobiographical? I'm not a twin. My mother's not a nun, But the older I get, the more my sense is that it's all autobiographical. You're drawing on, it's coming out of your head for one thing, and you're drawing on all the elements that you know. So there's almost nothing in there that isn't in some way autobiographical. I meant to add that. Sorry, go ahead.
So you have famously said that it was a book that led you to becoming a doctor and a patient that led you to becoming a writer. Could you talk to us a little bit about that convergence or the balance between Abraham Verghese, the physician, and Abraham Verghese, the writer?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Thank you. I think for a generation of physicians in my era and before, it was often a book that brought someone to feel called to medicine. And in the UK and the Commonwealth, the book was The Citadel by A.J. Cronin, which is a lovely book. I see some of you nodding your heads. Not well known in America, I don't know why. In America, the book was Arrowsmith by Sinclair Lewis. But in my case, it was Of Human Bondage, which is, not overtly a medical book. I would never recommend it to someone saying, this is going to call you to medicine, because the medical theme is very minor, but I think it spoke to me. I think that's one of the beautiful things about books. I think I was 9 or 10 years old, and for those of you who don't know the book, the book opens with a very dismal opening. A young boy, Philip, is brought to say goodbye to his mother who's on her deathbed. And you also find out on the same page that the boy has a club foot, a deformed foot. And the mother dies, you realize that there's no father. All this in a few pages. And the boy is brought up by foster parents, and it's a harsh existence. He's bullied about his foot, but he likes to draw. That is one of his escapes. He loves to draw, and so when he comes of age, he takes off to Paris to pursue painting. And when he first gets there, he's really excited. He's taking classes at the National Gallery with a particularly famous teacher. But after 6-7 months, he begins to have doubts. He wonders if he has what it takes. And he's running out of money, he's running out of faith. And so one day when he's standing outside his garret apartment in the freezing cold, and he's standing outside because he's avoiding the landlady, and he's freezing because he sold his coat. And just then his teacher, Monsieur Finet, comes walking by, and he says, Monsieur Finet, would you please come up and take a look at my paintings and tell me if you think I have what it takes. And Monsieur Finet, you sense, doesn't normally do this kind of thing, but he decides to come up, looks, and says, essentially, is there something else you could be doing? Which must have been crushing for Philip, but that's what he wanted. He wanted the truth. And so, with his tail between his legs, he goes back to London, where he has a small annuity that allows him to pursue medical school, or any school. He decides to go to medical school because of his club foot. And the first 2 years are drudgery, as they always are. But then comes this moment when Philip arrives on the wards. And Somerset Maugham describes the moment as follows. Philip saw humanity there in the rough, the artist's canvas, and he said to himself, this is something I can do. This is something I can be good at. Philip saw humanity there in the rough, the artist's canvas, and he said, this is something I can do. This is something I can be good at. And, I think those words really spoke to me. I had the sense that not everybody could be a gifted mathematician like my older brother, who is a professor at MIT. And his genius was evident when he was 7 or 8. Not everybody could be a gifted artist, but anybody with a curiosity about the human condition, anybody with a basic empathy for their fellow human being and a willingness to work hard could be a good physician. That's what I took away. And so I think that's what books can do. They can really change the course of your life. The passage I read to you, Bigamachi, essentially says, fiction is the great lie that tells the truth about how the world lives. And, that great lie of human bondage just set my path. And as you mentioned, ironically, it was medicine that brought me back to writing, or brought me to writing. I was trained in infectious diseases in Boston just as the AIDS epidemic was reaching its full peak. An unknown disease. We didn't know what was causing this. Our wards were full of patients. And during the second year of my infectious disease training, we finally knew what it was. There was a diagnostic test. But the scale of this became quite apparent. But I was leaving for a small town, a new medical school, population 50,000, nestled in the Smoky Mountains. And everybody said, oh, you're going to see one HIV-infected patient every other year, maybe, because AIDS was an urban condition, instead of which, in a short time, I was following 100 people with HIV infection. And it wasn't because, there was sexual transmission unusually going on there. I had stumbled onto a uniquely American story that was playing out in every small town. And the story goes like this. A young man grows up in a small town and leaves for all the same reasons you and I leave small towns: jobs, education, opportunity. But they were also leaving because they were gay and did not want to live that lifestyle under the close scrutiny of their friends and relatives. And so they moved to the big city. They found themselves, but tragically, decades later, the virus had found them, and oftentimes their partners had died, and now they were getting sick and they were moving back. And there I was at the tail end of this journey, taking care of unexpected numbers of patients. And it was a very moving time for me, because these patients were my age. They were dying. There was no medicine for them. And I got very close to them. I mean, I actually always say I learned more about manhood from my gay patients than I learned from any heterosexual man. I mean, these were the most incredibly, talented, broad-minded, men who taught you how to be a real friend to a woman, taught you how to really be interested in arts. So it was a very tragic time for me. I wrote a scientific paper describing this phenomenon of migration because I knew it was happening everywhere. And it became a very important scientific paper, but it didn't begin to capture, the tragic nature of this voyage. It didn't begin to capture the parents' grief. It didn't begin to capture my grief at watching this, men my age just withering and dying under my care. And so that was the moment that I became a writer. But I will say, I mean, everybody likes to ask me, they put me in two buckets, physician and writer, which are you? And I know this is disingenuous for me to say, but I see myself as all physician. I'm looking at the world through the lens of a physician, and it's that same lens which I bring to the writing, whatever it is. And I know that's disingenuous now. I have, 4 books to my name and 2, they've done well. But that is how I feel. I don't really feel I'm doing 2 separate things. I love medicine. The writing impulse comes out of medicine in some strange way. I don't know what would happen if I stopped medicine.
My 8-year-old son yesterday, when I was talking to him about you, he was saying he's only written 4 books. So I said, that's because he's full-time physician, and which you rightly explained. Interestingly, I was...
May I say something about that?
Yes.
You're right. It's a very slow productivity. Joyce Carol Oates has written something like 42 books, 30 collections of short stories, 18 plays. She's probably finished another one by this from breakfast, But I think the great joy of being a physician for me has been that I don't have to write to pay the college bills for my kids or, pay the rent, which gives you, a real freedom. And but I do recognize that I need to pick up the pace because the first book was 4 years, the second
I'm sure my son didn't
6.
mean it like that.
The third book was 8 years, and this one was 14 years. So I really need to move a little quicker.